is an adventure or nothing. I felt slightly threatened by that. Shared that with a friend. She says, oh, that's my goal in life. I would love to be developing mystically, slightly threatening messages to put into sweets. They said, no, that would be great. It was weird, but there it was. Now, Mark Twain, who wrote for both children and adults, offers up this little bit of wisdom for us today. He says, do the right thing. It will gratify some people and astonish the rest. Seems like a good way to live your life. Now, since this is Children's Sunday, we're going to explore doing the right thing through one of my favorite child theologians. You've heard him used before, Dr. Seuss. And we're going to look at the story of Horton the elephant, who hears a who. What? No, a who. Horton is going to try to save people that he cannot see, but he believes they're there because with his massive ears he can hear them, even when others stand against him and say it's not so. In his particular pachyderm way, Horton honors God, respecting, as it said in Acts today, the earth is the Lord's, and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it. The story begins on the 15th of May in the jungle of Newell. Horton the elephant sits in the cool of the pool, enjoying the jungle's greatest joy, a cool dip on a hot day. And as he revels in the pool, a strange thing happens to Horton. A dust mote floats by his face, and he hears a cry for help coming from a dust mote. He thinks about this for a minute. He says, I've never heard a dust mote speak before. This is particularly odd. So he says, well, I think there must be a person on that dust mote, at least one, who's crying out for help. And so Horton says to himself, I'm going to act on this because I believe that a person's a person, no matter how small. And so Horton takes his big trunk and he gently plucks that dust mote out of the air and deposits it on a very soft clover flower to do no harm. He plucks that clover and he starts to carry it with him. He thinks to himself, maybe it's not just one person, maybe it's an entire family. And then he's introduced to the character who cried for help. It's the mayor of a whole town, Whoville. You couldn't imagine a whole civilization on a dust mote. And the mayor thanks him for saving them from their drift. He said, for saving our houses, our stores, our churches, and all of our people in Whoville, from the small to the tall, the young to the old. We appreciate what you've done, Horton. And we can sympathize as we read along with both the Who and with Horton in this situation. Like the Who, we can sometimes find the whole world seems to be crying out for help, but nobody appears to be listening. There's no Horton to hear the distress. In Romans 8, Paul tells us that all creation groans for redemption. For humanity, God has been like Horton. He came to help all of us small little people floating on a dust speck out of the vast universe. If you've ever seen the picture of the Earth taken by one of our space probes ripping past Saturn, it is a tiny speck caught in a beam of sunlight, dust-like, who-like. And God came down in Jesus Christ to answer our cries, to save humanity and to redeem all of creation. Oftentimes, we find ourselves being like Horton, straining to hear the cries of the world or of human beings who can't be heard by most because they're either voiceless, they have no organization to speak for them, they're impoverished and overlooked, They are refugees without anyone to represent them. They are voiceless in our society. And like Horton, we try to hear their cries and help. And as Christians, that's precisely what we're called to do. In Acts 24, 1 through 2, we're reminded that all of the world belongs to God. God made everything and then gifted the world to us to be its stewards. That is, to help the world and all the people in it as a way of honoring that very generous gift to us. When Acts 24 was written, the people of Israel believed that their good fortune came to them at the hand of God. It was God's action that gave them any benefit they had in their lives. And they also believed that they were absolutely responsible for the fair and proper distribution of all that prosperity to other people, because God had given it to them as a gift. And they thought to ignore that would be to call upon disaster on themselves. Don't worry, it's going to end well. And on Children's Sunday, let me say, it is a joy to hear small voices in our congregation. In so many churches there are none. We are blessed. And we've been right where you are. Don't worry about it. We're called to be like Horton and to be like the people of Israel. We're called to help, to be fair, to properly distribute God's blessings around us. Horton is discovered at the edge of the pool in Newell talking to this suspect by a sour kangaroo and her baby. Well, Horton tries to explain what's going on, but that sour kangaroo just laughs at him. And she says, "I think you're a fool." Jungle monkeys come up. They won't put up with any of this nonsense of talking to a speck of dust and say you're trying to save somebody. So they grab the clover from Horton and they give it to an eagle. And that starts a long chase. Horton chases that eagle as it flies all night over the mountains until it comes to a particularly large clover patch, 100 miles wide, and drops that clover in the middle of it, saying, "That ends this problem. Just try to find it, Horton. Give up your obsession. Stop acting so ridiculous." Well, Horton is faithful. He's going to look after his friends. He promised he'd do that, and he's going to do it, so he picks 13 million clovers before he finds the one with the dust speck on it. It saves his friends and brings them back home. And when he gets home, the kangaroo and the monkeys are not happy with him any more than violent people are happy with groups of people they disagree with. And they say, "We're going to end this once and for all. We're going to resort to violence. We are going to tie you up, Horton. We're going to put you in a cage, and while you watch, we're taking your clover and your dust speck and we're boiling it in diesel nut oil. We'll make stew out of that clover and anything on it. Because we don't believe you." We live in a world that's often like that. A world that doesn't or willfully won't understand efforts that are made to save the planet, to save creatures large and small, or humans who are found to be voiceless in our society. Humans that are held as outcasts for one reason or another by one group or another and are attacked, like happened in Orlando, Florida. When I wrote this, that had not yet happened. But I feel compelled to tailor my sermon in part to that disaster. Some prefer greed, lust, and profit to proper stewardship. Some say, "I have bought this property or these animals, and I will do with it or them exactly as I please, and there's nothing you can do about it." Some will say, "Look, you're destroying the environment. Future generations will not be able to live well because of you." And they snarl and they sneer and they say, "I think you're a By the time that happens, if it happens, I will be dead. So what do I care? Well, sounds an awful lot like our sour kangaroo in the story. And this is not true according to Acts 24. The world and everything in it is not the private property of the greedy. It is not the property of ambitious kings. It is not the toys of the captains of industry. It is not the domain of politicians or nations. All of it belongs to God. As you read a little bit further, you find that the only people that can approach the mountain of God are those with pure hearts and clean hands. They're the only people acceptable to God. And to have a pure heart and clean hands, you have to honor God's creation. You have to work for all the voiceless people, animals, creation, and that pleases God. Yeah, I do like Horton. Those who violate creation displease God and make a mockery of God's created order. Much like that misguided kangaroo and the monkeys who were her minions, who kill people they can't hear or see out of sheer disbelief, and who would use violence to silence one good elephant trying to do right in the world. It's almost too late in the story. Horton has been roped. He's being pulled to the cage, and the Whos are about to become stew. Horton cries out to the Whos in Whoville through the mayor, and he asks them to yell as loud as they can. He says, I have big ears, I can hear you, the rest can't. You gotta make enough noise to be heard. And they try, but it's not working. Horton says, I can hear you, but they still can't. Is everybody helping? The mayor of Whoville rushes through the town until he finds one little child. Dr. Seuss says one little twerp would rather play with a yo-yo than help out. I don't want to be called a twerp by Dr. Seuss, so I got to work on these things. And the mayor of Whoville says to that child, every voice counts. He takes him to the tallest tower. He convinces that child to yell out. And when he does, it's just enough. That kangaroo and those monkeys, they hear the Whos, and for the first time they believe. They couldn't believe Horton's words alone. They had to have some evidence of their own, but now they've got it. And the Whos are saved. Like Horton, we're called to care for the earth and all of its creatures, large and small, even those so tiny we can't see them, not even hear them. We're called to care for each other, to have those clean hearts and clean hands, which ironically means rolling up your sleeves and getting your fingers dirty, to have the metaphorically clean hands. We can't be like the teen who was interviewed for a job as an usher at the movie theater, her first job, and was asked by the manager, what would you do if a big fire broke out in a crowded theater? And she thought about it for a minute. She responded, you don't have to worry about me. If it's a crowded theater and a fire breaks out, I'll get to safety. We instinctively tend to think of ourselves before we think of others. We have to think of others and all of creation instead. We've got to go against our instincts. To be good stewards, we must care for the fate of God's creatures, God's planet, and God's people. All of them. If we don't care for creation, and if we don't care for each other, neither is going to thrive. We have to do it all together. In biblical terms, to disrespect God's creation is to have God's blessing removed from us. And when God's blessing is removed, we are left to our own doom. Wow. One church has taken a small step in the right direction. And I like these examples that are incredibly simple because they're inspirational to me. They replaced all their styrofoam and paper cups with a rack and had everybody bring in their own ceramic mug. And they use that when they drink something, and they clean up after themselves, and that way they have put less garbage out each and every week. Another church has replaced all the regular lights with lights that come on and go off when there's movement in the room. So that only when people are present will the lights actually come on. I had a story this week. I'm always fascinated when God gets after me when I've been doing a sermon. He says, okay, you've done this, you've thought about this for a while. Let's see if you'll actually carry it through. And I just finished up. And I heard this little tapping sound over the window of my office. And I went over there, and there was a bumblebee beating herself against the window, unable to figure out how to get out and away from that glass and back out into life. And I thought about it for a second, and there's a fly swatter in my office. And then I thought about the who's and creation and tiny creatures. And I thought for a second, I said, well, I'll open this window. I'll take out the screen. And I'll use that screen to guide the bumblebee. And I guided it towards the window, and then it helped me out because there's a sill there. I couldn't get past it, and I figured out how it was going to work. And she just flipped herself around and grabbed hold of the screen. And I just shoved the screen out the window, and she went off to live her life. And I have to say, that felt a whole lot better to me than swamping her would have. It was a good feeling. And that reminded me of helping some people. Years ago, when I was still in seminary, and I was visiting with our parents. My mom was still alive at this point. And it was our Saturday, or their church's Saturday, to feed the homeless of Morgantown, West Virginia. My mother was particularly good at feeding people and at making a little go a long way. She fed 26 people on $23. It's kind of amazing. It felt like 5 loaves and 2 fish, 5 and 2. Now, kids, I want you to go and find out how many loaves and fish it was for the 4,000 instead of the 5,000. Great question for next week. You have to tell me because I can't think of it off the top of my head. But the thing that moved me the most about that experience was that my mother had a genius for making people feel good. And she bought popsicles. And she put them out at the end of the meal so they wouldn't get soft and mushy. And here were these people, downtrodden by society, ignored, abused, left to their own devices. And they walked up to that table and they looked at those popsicles and their eyes started to gleam. And the years fell off their face and suddenly they were all 5 again. And there were grape, and there were cherry, and there were lime. And what did they ask me for? I was serving. I had the joy of serving at that moment. They said, can I have a purple? Can I have a red? Can I have a green? The green's always been my favorite. It was so beautiful. And it made me so excited to serve. And I wanted to do it again. It was addicting, and I felt wonderful on the drive home. We drove back here after that, and it was a wonderful experience. In the end, once Horton has convinced the whole jungle gang that he's not crazy, there's really people that help here, they have a change of heart. They agree to help Horton protect the Who's. We're called to be like Horton the elephant, to work to save the voiceless world and its inhabitants so long ignored. We're called to be like Jesus, who came to save all of who like humanity and to redeem all of creation. We are called to remember the words of Whoville's mayor. We've got to make noise in greater amounts. So open your mouth, for every voice counts. Let's make our voices count. Let's pause for a moment of silence. Amen. If anyone is moved by today's service, the Spirit moves them, and they would like to commit their lives to Christ and join this church, please meet me after the service. I will be delighted to serve you. Now, please rise as you are able for our hymn of commitment number 670, Make Me a Blessing, verses 1 and 2.